My paranormal experiences started when I was about 4 years old. The very first thing that I can remember happening is the phone ringing. Now, you wouldn't think that there's anything strange or odd about that. My mom answers the phone, but again, you wouldn't think there's anything strange or odd about that. We didn't have a phone hooked up. We were waiting for the phone company to come hook us up. This was back in 1981, 1982, something around there. As I said, I was 4 years old. She reaches on top of the refrigerator to grab the phone to answer it, unwinds the phone cord, answers the phone. And I remember I'm standing in the doorway of the kitchen and I'm looking at her, watching her do all this. And she's talking on the phone, and I remember her saying, yes, okay, I understand, okay. She hangs up the phone, wraps the cord back up, places the phone back on the refrigerator. And then she looks at me and looks at the wall and looks on top of the fridge. Looks at me again, and I'm looking at her, and I'm looking at the wall where the phone is supposed to be hooked up to. And I look back at her, and I'm like, Mom? She grabs me, runs outside, and we go to our next door neighbor's house. And she looks at our next door neighbor, and she's like, I need to call the gas company now. They come out and check over the house and everything. My mom was about to start the stove when the phone rang so she could cook dinner. If she would have done it, if she would have ignored the phone call and turned on the oven to cook dinner, the house would have blown up. We had a gas leak. That's the first memory of anything paranormal happening. A few months later, we're driving somewhere. I don't remember if we were going to someplace or home from someplace. But we were driving, and my mom saw wild hyacinths or lilacs on the side of the road that she wanted to pick. So she stops the car, gets out, grabs them, brings them back into the car, and she's smelling them as she's driving, and all of a sudden she just throws them out the window. And I look at her and I'm like, Mom, why'd you do that? She's like, I don't know, something told me to. And I'm like, oh, okay. And we continue going home, and I asked her again when we got home, and she's like, well, something told me there were ticks on the bottom of the flowers and to get rid of them. So I didn't question it any further. Nothing else really happened while we were living there, because this all happened in Oxford, PA. And that's the first place I remember us living. That's the first paranormal experiences that I ever remember having. A few years go by. She had moved us to Delaware. And I never told her this. So, Mom, if you're listening to this in the future, I love you and I'm sorry, but this is what happened. The one house that we lived at in Delaware, I remember seeing shadow people all the time. Did not matter what time of day. I saw shadow people, and we had a cemetery behind our house. You had, like, our house, a very small backyard, an alleyway, and then the cemetery. Because I would scare my brothers because of the cemetery. Their bedroom window overlooked the cemetery. But I would see shadow people all the time. I don't quite remember what all they were doing, but just out of the corner of my eye, I'd come home from school, go up to my room, and be doing my homework, and I'd see shadows, just dirt everywhere. Never did anything to me. I didn't really feel creeped out or that it was abnormal. Just, it was an everyday thing. It was normal to me. I later moved to Ohio to live with my grandparents. And that's when it seems that all of my paranormal activity experiences really ramped up. Not so much when my grandparents were alive. It was after they both had passed. The only thing while they were alive was I would have this dream that my walls were bleeding, and it scared me because I can't say that. I have had weird dreams like that before, but this one felt different. And the fact that there was a chain link fence outside of my bedroom window that you could hear something hit it. Same time of year, same time of night. Always like around 11 o'clock at night. I don't remember exactly what time of year it was, but you'd hear something hit the fence. I remember having this dream that my walls were bleeding. And I got up the next morning and I looked at my grandmother and asked her if anything happened on the property. And she looked me dead in the eye and she's like, "No, what do you mean?" And I asked her if anybody had died on the property. She's like, "No, nothing like that happened here, ever." And I told her about the noise hitting the chain link fence, and she's like, "Well, that must have been a deer jumping over the fence." Where we lived in Masury, yes, our driveway was technically a dirt road, but we had houses in the front of us, and off to the one side where my bedroom faced, we had our neighbor's house. He raised sheep. Sheep were never out at night. Years later, after my grandfather had passed, because my grandmother passed first and then my grandfather, we were going through my grandfather's things, and my mom came across this newspaper article about a double murder that happened on our property. Apparently, it was my cousin and his girlfriend at the time had gotten into some bad things, and people came to collect. She got shot on the front porch. He was shot running out the back door. And when he had gotten shot, he was found laying across the chain link fence outside of where my bedroom window now was. They had torn the house down into the basement and just covered everything. So technically that house is still there, just down in the basement covered up. And then my grandparents had moved in and put their double-wide trailer mobile home on top of their property. After my grandparents had passed, we would see shadow people, specifically one shadow person, outside of the window, my mom's window, which later became my window. Just pacing back and forth. Well, one night it moved. It was no longer just in front of my window. It moved all the way down the house to my mom's window. Our bedrooms were on separate sides of the house. It would circle the house and come back around to my window. And then we would hear the footsteps on the front porch. Nobody was outside. We lived 20, 30 feet off of the main road. As I said, you had to go down like a dirt road. That was our driveway. Later, my brother and sister had moved up from Delaware and was living with us. One night, we were having a bonfire outside. It was middle of summer. Just talking, having a good time outside of a bonfire. And in the tree line, I mean, there wasn't that many trees, but my grandfather had trees bordering the property. We saw this shadow looking out from behind a tree. Behind the tree was this little shack of a house. Always been there ever since I could remember, and I've been coming onto this property since I was 5 years old, spending the summers with my grandparents. It was like a little one-bedroom shack. Had the entranceway that had nothing but windows. You walked in from the entranceway to the main living area of the house, which was really tiny. Kitchen, living room, all in one. Small room off to the side that could have been a bathroom, and then a small bedroom in the back. I only mention this house because my grandfather had gotten permission from the next door neighbor who owned it to use it as extra storage. I did not like going into this house when I was younger. I did not like going into it to grab anything later as I became an adult. Hated that house. Just the vibe of it, looking at it, freaks me out. The night that we had the bonfire, that's the direction this shadow creep thing was looking from. Had a hat, looked like it was wearing a long trench coat, but it was shadow. We looked at it, it saw that we looked at it, noticed us, took a step out from the tree line, and we all put out the fire and went inside. Did not go outside unless we absolutely had to at night for 3-4 days. When we got the courage up to go back outside at night, because we wanted to see if it was just the reflection of the fire, if we actually saw something. We had gone past the little tree line that my grandfather had set up and was standing in front of this house. And we saw the hat shadow man walking back and forth in the house. That was it. We're like, you stay on that side of the property, you can have it, it's yours, we'll be over here. Don't come near us, just stay over there. I don't really remember anything much happening after that with the shadow man, but me and my mom decided that we were going to paint the living room. We had paneling. My grandfather, for years, I begged him to let me paint my bedroom because I could not stand the paneling. The paneling was too dark. I just wanted the room painted. My grandfather always yelled at me, you do not paint over paneling. It does not turn out right. Well, knowing this, my mom decided we were painting the living room anyway because my grandfather was no longer around. She owned the house now. She wanted to make it hers. So we started painting in the middle of January. Not a problem. Until the flies showed up. We were infested with flies covering the windows, just flying around, making a nuisance. Just so many flies. In the middle of January, when we had the windows open, even though we were cold, but so we weren't getting sick from the fumes of the paint, we had to have the windows open. There were still flies when they should have been hibernating, dead. I don't know what flies do, but I know you don't see them in winter. And at the same time that happened, we were listening to a rock station on the radio. Not too loud, just loud enough that we could hear the music and do our own thing while we were painting the walls. Well, the radio changed stations to country and the volume went all the way up. Didn't think anything of it. First time it happened, went over, turned the volume down, changed it back to the station we were listening to. Walked away. The radio did it again. Me and my mom looked at each other I look at the stereo. I'm like, all right, Grandpa, we get it. Knock it off. Changed it back to what we were listening to. The radio shuts off. We could not get the radio to turn back on the rest of the day. The next day, we finish up painting the house, the living room and everything. We were happy with it. Didn't turn out too bad. It actually brightened up the living room, made it look bigger than what it was. And I'm in my bedroom on my computer. My mom's in her bedroom on her computer. And I could have sworn I heard my mom calling my name from the living room. Well, we meet each other in the living room because I come out of my room after I yelled and didn't hear an answer. I come out of my bedroom, my mom comes out of hers, and we meet in the middle of the living room. And we each looked at each other and said, "What did you want?" at the exact same time. I looked at her, I'm like, "Well, you called me." She's like, "No, you were calling me. What did you need?" I'm like, "I don't need anything. What did you want?" And we stood there arguing with each other for 5 minutes because we could have sworn that the other person called the other one out of their room. I don't know what that was about. My mom had informed me yesterday that her and my brother are experiencing the exact same thing, and none of us live in that house in Masury anymore. I live in Niles, my mom lives in Warren. But my mom still sees shadow people at her house. She still hears people calling her name. That my brother won't need anything, but she swears that he's calling for her and he swears she's calling for him, and neither one of them are saying anything. But while we were living in Masury, because all of those experiences were paranormal, yes. Out of the ordinary, sure. We were used to those because we lived with it on a day-to-day basis. Wasn't that big of a deal. Sure, okay, it creeped us out every once in a while, but we could deal with it. Nothing ever touched us. Nothing ever harmed us. We were fine. One night in 2001, 2002, it was late summer, early fall, we were going to my aunt's house, or coming home from my aunt's house. It was about 10, 11 o'clock at night, and we were passing by this road called North Fox North, because we took the back way into Pennsylvania, where my aunt was living at the time. Well, we've heard all these stories about North Fox North, how by the train tracks you could hear a woman crying for her child or something. And we wanted to find out what the hype was about because we were curious. We drove down to the train tracks, stopped the car, turned lights out, everything you were supposed to do, didn't hear anything. So we turned around, was heading back home. At the entrance to North Fox North, there was this real thick fog that wasn't there when we turned onto the road. But This real thick fog covered the entranceway to the road just in that area. Nothing was on Chestnut Ridge, just the entrance to North Fox North. Out of the fog comes this Doberman dog looking thing, but it was taller. Way taller than what it should have been. And we rolled up the windows, and me and my mom's just looking at each other, asking, what is that? The only thing that we could think of to describe it is it was a dog from Resident Evil. You could see that it had chunks of flesh just missing from it, where you could see the muscle and the bone, and it was stalking. It had its head down, and it was stalking us, because it was coming straight for our car. The truck comes off of the highway, heading down on Chestnut Ridge towards our direction. We see the truck. The truck sees the thing. The truck stops. The thing, now the Resident Evil dog, turns around, looks at the truck, and starts slowly walking towards the truck. We took that opportunity. We hightailed it out as the truck was backing up from this dog that was 2 inches taller than the hood of the truck, and it was still on all fours. The truck was a lifted truck with the big tires. Later, when we got home, we both looked at each other and were just, we wish we had a camera. Nobody's going to believe us. And we told a few people about it. Now, I told my sister, which she told us that we were making it up. We told my brother. He was the only one out of the immediate family that believed us. Years later, I told my now ex-husband. He didn't believe it. He was like, yeah, okay, that's a nice story. You watch way too many scary movies. Oh, we'd since gotten divorced, and I am now with somebody else, and I told him. His immediate response was, you had seen a hellhound. And since then, we have gone out to the woods and have gotten growled at from Bigfoot, and we'd stopped there for a while, and he's been planning on going back out to just to walk around and scope things out, and life had gotten in the way, and we haven't done that yet. But I could talk for hours about all of my paranormal experiences. I just don't fully remember all of them or in what order offhand right now, because as I was talking to my mom yesterday, she had reminded me of some stories that I had told her. I'm like, oh, yeah, I completely forgot that happened. And, I mean, my mom has had experiences. I've had experiences. My grandmother had experiences. That runs in our family. I think that I don't want to say magnet, but we're more sensitive to things like that. Because I can remember a story that my grandmother had told me about when she was a child. Her brother had died, and back then you had the viewing and everything inside the home. Well, her being little, I forget how old she said she was, but the family had left the home first, and they were out waiting by their cars for the casket to be carried out. Well, apparently you're not supposed to watch the casket being carried out. And my grandmother, being a little girl, turned around and saw her brother walking out behind his casket. Her mom smacks her on the back of the head and pretty much said, "Thank you, now he's stuck in the house." And that was it. My grandmother refused to speak about it anymore after that, and I never asked her any more questions. But that was the first thing that my grandmother told me that she had experienced. Now, my mom, on the other hand, she has a bunch of stories that I'm sure she has not even told me yet. But that's all that I can remember as of right now. I'm sure there's others that I will think of in the future, or knowing me and my family, other things will happen in the future. I have no idea.
If you've had a paranormal experience and would like to be a guest on the show, please contact us by going to myparax.com. That's myparaex.com. Thanks for listening.